Hello fellow teachers. In this video, we will be introducing how questions posed on bar graphs would be differentiated to accommodate students of higher ability in a lesson. Now, let's look at the learning outcome and also the success criteria of the lesson. By the end of the lesson, students should be able to read and interpret bar graphs. With that being said, students should be able to read explicit data, form relationships between the variables, and also make inferences and predictions based on the bar graphs. The differentiating of questions that we are going to be introducing here would revolve around the three levels of graph comprehension, and that includes reading the graph, reading between the graph, and also reading beyond the graph. Reading the data would involve explicit questions that require students to read and locate information directly from the graph given. Next, reading between the data. Questions posed at this level would require students to identify the relationship and trends in the data represented in a graph. Lastly, reading beyond the data would pose questions that allow students to make predictions and deduce conclusions based on the data within the graph.
Now, let's take a look at this question. Sunflower International School is holding a sports tournament next month, and every student in the school is required to choose to participate in one of the sports competitions available. The competitions available are basketball, football, handball, badminton, dodgeball, and volleyball. Miss Reen, the homeroom teacher of Tree Violet, would like to know the choices of her students so that she could sign the students up for the sports competition. In this video, the differentiated instruction will be applied by providing different graphs that represents the same scenario to students. As you can see here, there are two different types of graphs that shows the type of sports competition chosen by the students of Tree Violet. Students will work on questions that are based on a graph that involves only one variable, which you can see on your right, while students of higher ability will be provided a graph that involves two variables, which is on your left. Now, let's look at some of the questions that can be asked in the first level of graph comprehension, reading the data. These are some of the questions you can consider asking your students. So the difference between the question asked here is that high ability students are provided with a more complex bar graph, and the way of asking the questions are different. From the questions proposed, we can see that the answers can be identified and lifted directly from the bar graph. For example, the first question, how many categories are there presented in the bar graph? Students could just count the number of bars that are presented in the bar graph and state the total number. As for high ability students, it would require students to list the categories presented in the bar graph.
These are some of the extra questions for each of the bar graph that you can refer to while planning your lesson. Moving on to the second level of graph comprehension, reading between the data. These are the example questions teacher could ask their students. From these example questions, students are required to compare the differences between the two categories by using the mathematical operation, subtraction, to acquire the answer. As for students of higher ability, an additional step of totaling up the number of girls and boys in the same category is required before subtracting. These are some of the extra questions for each of the bar graph that you can refer to while planning your lesson. Now, let's look at some example questions for the final level of the graph comprehension, reading beyond the data. Based on the questions suggested, students will have to make predictions and inferences based on their prior knowledge on data that are neither explicitly nor implicitly stated in the graph. For example, questions 2 for higher ability students. A student can predict the most popular sports competition among the boys students based on his observation that most of the boys in the school prefers to play football during their PE lesson. Therefore, he can predict that the most popular sports competition among the boys of the school is football.
In this video, we have presented to you a strategy to differentiate your instruction for higher ability students when teaching the topic on reading and interpreting bar graph. Hope you find this helpful for your future lesson, and thank you for watching.